Let's talk about that. Joining me now is the senior senator from the state of Florida, Marco Rubio, who I believe is in Miami. Senator Rubio, thank you so much for being with us. What are you hearing? What updates are you getting on the situation, especially along the coast where that storm surge is?
Yeah, well, first of all, I actually think the National Weather Service, the Hurricane Center, deserves a lot of credit. You know, they've improved on their forecast every year, and I think so far, not just where it's going to hit, but the intensity of it, the ability to predict intensity, I think has been excellent. They deserve that credit. I talked to the sheriff of Taylor County. You know, that's where Keaton Beach is early this morning, about 7:40, shortly after landfall. So I was glad to see I could get through cell phone coverage. And, you know, at that time, they were dealing with the winds. I think the real concern that I have, obviously, and I think you're hearing from the meteorologists and the experts, is not so much the eye of the storm, but the sustained winds for some period of time in areas to the east of that storm, and then up north where you are. I believe you're in Tallahassee, where you got all those live oaks, this huge tree canopy that's very vulnerable, has never really been tested by a storm of this magnitude. And then you've heard a lot about the storm surge. You know, I mean, Cedar Key is, you know, is like a historic fishing village type setting. Keaton Beach is actually one of the most unspoiled places of our state. Those places are going to be dramatically transformed, as are a bunch of areas on this path, both because of the tree cover that they have up there, which looks more like Georgia than you know, tropical South Florida, for example. So we got a few more hours ahead here of wind, and the only good news, if there is any, is that you know, we avoided sort of the worst case scenario in Tampa Bay, which is the one we're always afraid of. Is this, they're still going to have some storm surge there, but it's not going to be the worst case scenario.
Yeah, it didn't seem to make landfall in a populated area, but a very vulnerable area, as you say, with the storm surge hitting Cedar Key and Steinhatchee, Taylor County. I was in Taylor County just yesterday. It's encouraging that you were able to make contact with the sheriff. His deputies were going door to door last night, trying to get people to evacuate to higher ground. You mentioned the National Weather Service and the warnings that were given. Is it your sense that people are heeding these warnings when they're warned of the devastating storm surge, that people now understand what that means?
Well, two things. The first is I think that just based on what state officials and local officials have told us, there are always going to be some people that stay behind. I think that's true in Taylor County. The good news is they know who these people are and where they live. For the bad news is if they get in trouble out there, no one's going to be able to get to them for quite some time. And there's been an innovation here over the last few years. It's still listed as an experimental model, but they're relying more and more on it. And that is the ability to predict storm surge. And it's increasingly building into the way we forecast these storms and the way we advertise them to the public. For the first time in hurricane season, I've seen news outlets like CNN and the local outlets actually go to the storm surge projection, the storm surge cone, before they go to the wind cone. And I think that's very encouraging, because that really, I mean, wind obviously is a very dangerous thing, but it's that storm surge that I don't think was really built into the way we analyzed or thought about storms in the past. And I'm very happy to see that's working itself into the forecast, and that it's proved, you know, quite accurate in sort of predicting the danger and the right places to evacuate.
You mentioned you were speaking to the sheriff in Taylor County. Have you heard of any people trapped at this point or loss of life?
I have not, and that doesn't mean there isn't. Obviously, as the storm blows through, you're going to lose power, you'll lose cell connectivity. I was just checking a moment ago. I think they were up to almost 300,000 people in the state without power, obviously in this area primarily. So it's possible those calls haven't gone through, and even if they did, it's possible they can't get to them. Now, I'm not getting real-time information on that. The Emergency Operations Center would know more about that, and others at the state level. But it's almost certain that there will be people out there that stayed behind that are going to get themselves in some trouble in the hours to come, unfortunately.
You know, Senator Rubio, it was Mexico Beach in 2018, I think it was. It was Fort Myers Beach and Punta Gorda last year that had these storm surge events. Now it's the Big Bend area with these storm surge events, these low-lying coastal areas. You know, and people do live there, but it's every year, every couple years, where you're seeing this devastating, destructive storm surge. How does that factor into where people, do you think, choose to live, or how they build along the Florida Gulf Coast?
Yeah. Well, what happens, unfortunately, from an economic standpoint is when a storm comes through, I'll give you an example, Monroe County, right? It destroyed all the mobile home parks, everything that was down there back in the storm back in, I believe, 2018. And what's going to get rebuilt is not just going to be up to code, meaning up to modern code to withstand that kind of event, but it's going to be a lot more expensive just because the cost of building it at that level. And think about it. If you're the owner of a land that has a mobile home park and now you can sell it to someone who's going to develop it into $1 million townhomes, you're going to go with a $1 million townhome offer. So I think it changes the nature and the character of these places. In fact, you talked about Mexico Beach. You could see the area overhead, and you could literally identify which were the houses that were built up to the modern code and which ones were pre-existing and how they withstood the wind. The water event, obviously is a very different dynamic. I mean, there's only so much you can do. You can elevate a little bit, but when you're talking about 7-8 feet of storm surge, I mean, it's very tough to build against that. And especially in the Gulf of Mexico, we have very low shelf. I'm not a geologist or marine geologist, but I know that there's a very low shelf there, and so the water piles up much faster. And then you've got the inland flooding too if you've got a significant rain event. So it's changing the character of these communities. You'll see that increasingly in Fort Myers Beach and Southwest Florida as a result of last year's storm.